Hello there, welcome to Fully Painted. Today I'm gonna show you how I painted these colorful little chicken bobbers for my Seraphon army. We'll learn how to paint some blue flame and to do some nice simple freehand. Now let's get to the lab. The color scheme I use for my Seraphon army is to give them a cold white skin underbelly and flashy colored scales on the back. This means I start all my Seraphon the same way. I do the white skin first. The recipe has evolved a lot the more units I paint. I try to change the way I paint stuff for this army constantly, so I make sure to keep learning and keep things fun. The current method consists of a dark blue base coat followed by a light grey from above with the airbrush. You can absolutely use a rattan can for this, and in fact that was the way I did it with my skinks. I will probably use a can on the new Saurus Warriors when I try to build a pack of 30. With this quick Zenithal base done, we can move on to... The skinks themselves are going to be fairly simple and quick. Most of the paint job is done with the pre-shade. The flame's going to be the more interesting part. I start by adding some highlights to the white skin. I simply reuse the same light grey color I used for the airbrush Zenithal and hit the light facing spots on the head and shoulders. That way I just turn the opacity of that grey way up in the spots that I want. After that, I put some green transparent paint on the back scales. I add some highlights with an off-white before glazing it all with my green transparent paint again. Next up is the spine, which I paint black. I do a first pass of grey followed by a coat of black Templar contrast. I highlight with my initial grey before adding off-white to it for a final highlight. For the fins, I do a jade base coat, a dark blue wash, and a highlight by adding off-white to the jade. I also add small black dots to give them some personality. After that, I paint the arm protection in purple. Since it's well textured, I thin down my purple color a bit more than I would for a normal base coat, just so I can get the pre-shade underneath to appear. I then highlight the scales by adding off-white to the purple. I go lighter than I feel would look good, so I can do a glaze with the purple ink later. After that, I add some cold blood vibes to the skin. I mimic the way you glaze reds on human skin tones to suggest blood, but here I do it with blue. So I glaze that blue on places where skin would be the thinnest, like knees and elbows, but also hands and feet. Next, I tackle all the unimportant bits and doodads with brown paint. That means the necklace, the rope tied to the flaming nugget, and other things. I also tried a different way to do the metals for my lizards. I decided to base coat it all with brown. This was inspired by Andy Wardle's gold recipe for his Lumineth. Spoiler alert, I won't do it again. For the mouths of the skinks, I do a first coat with a mix of Gorgon Fur and Blood Angel Red contrast paints, which gives me more of a reddish brown tone. Finally, I hit the teeth with an off-white. For the eyes, I do a first layer with a nice vibrant yellow before reusing my reddish brown mix. I dilute it well so it doesn't stain the eye too much, but it pulls at the border, which makes it feel like blood vessels. Finally, I do a line for the pupil with black paint. When that's all done, I can tackle the most interesting bit on the skink, which is... I've rarely painted fire on miniatures before, so this part was a bit scary. I watched a few tutorials online as usual, but the most inspiring one was from Andy Wardle for his Adepticon 2022 entry. It's for the Cult of Paint's Patreon, but that flame looked so good, I really wanted mine to look even half as good. So I tried to replicate the process, but with blue colors. I started with the base coat of sky blue over the base of the flame and the... what is that? A fire turd? A flaming cockroach? Anyways, after that I paint the rest of the flames. I keep using darker and darker colors that I apply farther and farther away from the source of the fire. The important bit is where to place each color. For flames, we want the inner bits to be lighter and the outer bits to be darker. So that's the logic I'm trying to follow. For the end of the flame, I use a dark grey to simulate smoke. I add some small light blue dots in the grey or dark blue bits to simulate some flying embers. I did a glaze over the whole thing with a fluorescent blue, but honestly it didn't do much, so I skipped this step for the rest of the unit. And that's how I did the flames. This means that apart from the bronze, our little skink riders are done. So we can move on to... Well, the pterodons, I wanted to go for something exotic with tons of colors. I knew I wanted it mainly purple, but I also wanted to take advantage of the huge real estate on wings to do some nice simple freehand. So I started by painting the back and head of the bird in a dark purple, as well as other small scaly parts. For the wings themselves, I tried to have a blend going from dark purple for the edges to a magenta for the center of the wing. I painted the spine of the pterodon and its claws in black, following the same recipe I used for the spine of the skink. I also painted his eyes and mouth in the same way. I painted the feathers using two different schemes. A jade one that was washed with the dark blue, and a blue and purple one also washed with the dark blue. For the bomb, I sort of follow my black recipe with a coat of black Templar contrast paint followed by layers of Mechanicus Standard Grey on spots that are facing the light. I wanted to make them look a little magical, so I mixed contrast medium with white ink and put that in the recesses of the symbols on the bombs. Then I glazed it with a blue fluorescent paint. Looks fine, but doesn't read super well as OSL in my opinion. Oh well, it will have to do. But enough beating around the bush, you're here to see the freehand, so let's have at it. Let me show you how I did. For this freehand, I'm looking for something colorful and flamey looking. I start painting simple flames with a nice blue. I looked up some simple references online to help me with the pattern. After that, I add some jade to my blue and go over the inside of the flames with it. I do it again with pure jade, covering an even smaller surface. My last layer is in dark blue, however, because I have something fun in mind. I want a sort of crackled rock motif going with the dark blue and the jade. So I go back to my jade color and trace cracks in the dark blue layer. I try to be somewhat random about it and also not too repetitive. I do a second layer to get a clean definition. And that's basically how I did the whole pattern. Honestly, it took a while and I'm not even finished. When I saw how much time it took, I decided the underside of the wings will have no pattern. The next step is to highlight the freehand. For that, I go back to each color that I used on the wings, which are purple, magenta, blue, jade and dark blue, and I add enough white to them to get my highlights colors. I do that twice to get 2 highlight colors. Then I simply highlight every color one by one. The thought behind the highlight placement is that for wings that are raised and almost parallel to the sun, I edge highlight the scales and do a final dot at the top. For the other wings, I kinda look for the points that take the most light. I cover the entire spot with the first highlight, and then I do the second highlight on edges or a smaller area. Obviously, I try to make sure to keep the highlight placements consistent between all the colors. While I show you this long highlighting process, let me tell you how I came up with the pattern. When starting these miniatures, I actually had no clue how I would do the freehand on the wings. I just knew I wanted some cool patterns on there like the box art did. So I did some tests, quite a few to be honest. I think I tried up to 4 variations. I obviously didn't record them because that would have been way too smart. But yeah, I actually tested them on the pterodons, which means I had to repaint the wings on half of them. And that's totally fine. Don't be afraid to use your actual models as test models too. You can always repaint. Just remember to paint bravely. Jeez, I hope Brendan Casey didn't copyright that. Anyway, I did quite a bit of research online to see what other people had done. In the end, I really liked the stripes they did for the box art, but I also found one with the crackled earth effect, and I thought I should try and combine the two. And that's what I did with my different attempts. I quickly realized copying the tone effect on the edges of the stripes on the box art would be too hard, so I tried it differently. I also switched the stripes orientation and found that more pleasing. The last attempts were more about getting the cracks right. But yeah, that's how I did the freehand. It was a long process, but I think it was worth it. And it also means the me is almost done. So let's get to... As I mentioned earlier, I did a first pass of brown over all the metallic bits to get a good first base as well as clean separation between all the different parts. However, I feel it was too time consuming for very little effect, so I will probably not do it again in the future. For the bronze itself, I used one of my favorite new metal paints, Pure Metal Pigment Bronze from Grinselfeld. I mixed it with Vallejo metal color varnish as suggested by Vince Venturella, and it looks amazing. I did one coat of it on all the bronze bits. After that, I shaded them with glazes of Gold Grunter Ferric contrast paint. I did some pin washing and final glazing with Psycho Brown. And finally, I did some highlights by mixing Vallejo metal color aluminium to the bronze. I did a very simple steel recipe for the chains holding the bomb. Base coat of Vallejo metal color steel plus Payne's Grey ink, and highlight with Vallejo metal color silver. And that's it for the metals. Well, they look great. I feel all this glazing is a bit too time consuming. I feel like I need to find a more efficient recipe. Anyway, we're almost done, so let's jump straight to... I did the bases for these guys a while back, so I don't really have footage of that, but it was overall fairly simple. I just slapped on some mud texture from Vallejo, added some tiny rocks and some tea leaves, and finally I made vines with strings. After priming and doing a zenithal highlight, I start painting. The idea here is to apply a lot of simple techniques to build up complexity. I first paint the whole thing brown and quickly wet blend the front of the base with the lighter brown and the back with black. I then dry brush the whole base with a lighter brown before painting all the stones with an off-white. I then put a mix of skeleton horde and snakebite leather onto the stone before re-highlighting them with the off-white. I also wash the whole base with different colors to give more life to it. I stick some leaves made from coffee filters onto the vines and also give them a wash. I then get out my collection of plastic plants, glue some onto the base and quickly paint them. Finally, I paint the rim of the base with a dark purple. I know, it's not black, but I started this army quite a while back and felt that having the rim be purple would help the unit stay cohesive, since I intended to have a lot of different colors spread out throughout the army. I might change it at some point when I add more units, I don't know. But that's my Pterodon unit finished. They were quite fun to paint, although they took me quite some time. Just figuring out my color scheme and freehand pattern took me forever, but I'm glad I did it because I think they look super cool. On a side note, while they were fun to paint, gluing the riders onto the Pterodon was absolute pain. I had to line up the handles to the necklace while still having the riders sitting correctly onto the Pterodon's back. It was yeesh, and the instructions did not help. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful and that it made you want to stick around for the next one. But in the meantime, I have a seminar on space folding crochet. So until then, I hope you stay adventurous and that you keep painting, because painting is cool.